Welcome back to our journey through Ottoman history. In our last episode, we saw Mehmed I emerge victorious from a brutal civil war, becoming the undisputed, but winning the throne was only the beginning. The real challenge was holding the empire together. Even with the crown, Mehmed faced dangers from within. Years of war had shattered loyalty. Ambitious local warlords, sensing weakness, believed they could break away and rule their own territories. At the same time, new religious movements were capturing the hearts and minds of the common people. The Ottoman Empire was united on the map, but it was far from united in spirit. Mehmed knew a fundamental truth. An empire isn't saved by a crown, but by control. One of the most serious threats he faced came not from a prince or a rival army, but from an idea. Sheikh Bedreddin was a brilliant religious scholar, a philosopher, and a revolutionary thinker. He preached a message that was radical for its time, true equality. He envisioned a world of shared wealth, shared land, and even a shared faith, blurring the lines between different religions. This powerful message resonated deeply with the disenfranchised, the peasants, the disgruntled soldiers, and the minorities who felt left behind by the state. For the first time in Ottoman history, a major rebellion wasn't sparked by a claimant to the throne, but by an ideology that promised to turn the world upside down. Sheikh Bedreddin's movement spread like wildfire across the empire. It was more than just a protest. It was a direct challenge to the entire social hierarchy. It questioned the very concept of authority, from the local governor all the way up to the Sultan himself. It threatened the foundation upon which Ottoman rule was built. But Mehmed I didn't react with blind force. He was a strategic thinker. He studied the movement, trying to understand its appeal. He knew that you can't defeat an idea with a sword alone. However, as the rebellion grew and its followers turned to violence, disrupting trade and attacking state officials, Mehmed knew that action had become unavoidable. The time for observation was over. Ottoman forces were dispatched to confront Bedreddin's followers in multiple regions. The decentralized nature of the revolt made it difficult to suppress, but the superior organization and discipline of the Sultan's army eventually prevailed. The rebellion was systematically crushed. Sheikh Bedreddin himself was captured. Despite his immense intellect and popular influence, he was tried and executed in 1420. The message sent by Mehmed was clear and unclear. The empire would tolerate different thoughts and beliefs, but it would not tolerate chaos that threatened its very existence. With the internal rebellions quelled, Mehmed turned to another, more subtle wound: the people's deep-seated fear of authority. After more than a decade of civil war, taxation, and bloodshed, trust in the state was at an all-time low. Mehmed knew he had to rule differently. He began by reducing excessive and arbitrary taxes that had crippled farmers and merchants. He invested in restoring judicial fairness, ensuring that the courts were seen as impartial and just. He made it clear that his government was there to protect its subjects, not just exploit them. Justice, not just military might, became the empire's strongest weapon. Slowly but surely, a sense of security and trust began to return to the land. Unlike his father Bayezid, who was known for his aggressive expansion, Mehmed I deliberately avoided unnecessary wars. His priority wasn't conquest, it was recovery. He signed treaties with neighboring powers, including the Byzantines and various Balkan states. He respected borders and used diplomacy to de-escalate tensions. He was buying something more valuable than land: time. This period of relative peace allowed the exhausted army to recover, the state treasury to refill, and the economy to stabilize. Mehmed understood a profound lesson of statecraft. Sometimes the greatest conquest is achieving a lasting peace. While he pursued peace externally, Mehmed worked tirelessly to strengthen his military internally. The famed Janissary Corps, the elite infantry of the empire, had been weakened by the civil war. Mehmed initiated a thorough reorganization. He re-established strict discipline, replacing the chaos of the He standardized training, ensuring that recklessness was replaced by tactical skill. Critically, he reformed the promotion system. Commanders were now chosen based on loyalty and proven ability, not their family connections or political maneuvering. The Ottoman military machine, which had nearly sputtered out, regained its formidable edge, ready to defend the newly stabilized empire. Mehmed also skillfully navigated the delicate relationship between religious authority and state power. The ulama, the class of Islamic scholars, were shown great respect, and the courts continued to follow Islamic law in their judgments. This ensured the religious legitimacy of his rule. However, Mehmed made it absolutely clear that the ultimate authority rested with the Sultan. The state would uphold the faith, but the faith would not rule the state. This careful balance prevented religious figures from challenging his power, as Sheikh Bedreddin had, while still maintaining the support of the religious establishment. This principle would become a defining and enduring feature of Ottoman governance for centuries to come. History tends to remember the conquerors, the builders of grand monuments. Mehmed I was neither. He is not remembered for massive conquests or for building glorious mosques that bore his name. His reign was quiet, almost understated. He worked endlessly, not for personal glory, but to repair the fractured foundations of the empire. He was the indispensable healer, the patient restorer. His success was largely in Visabella crisis averted, a rebellion pacified, a treasury refilled. But this invisible work was absolutely essential. He prepared the empire for the golden age that was to come. In the year 1421, after a reign of just 8 years, Sultan Mehmed I passed away. He left behind a legacy far greater than any single victory. He left a stable empire. He left a loyal and reorganized army. And crucially, he left a clear and undisputed line of succession. For the first time in over 20 years, the Ottoman throne passed peacefully from father to son. His successor, Murad II, inherited not the chaos and ruin that Mehmed had found, but an empire filled with strength and opportunity. Most empires in history fall after a catastrophic defeat and never recover. The Ottoman Empire survived its own near-death experience. It endured a decade of self-destruction and emerged stronger. And it did so because one man, Mehmed I, made a series of critical choices. He chose unity over personal ambition. He chose patience over pride. And he chose the slow, difficult work of healing over the fleeting allure of glory. He may not be the most famous of sultans, but in many ways, Mehmed I was the man who truly saved the Ottoman Empire. After the catastrophic defeat at Ankara and the death of Bayezid, the Ottoman Empire stood on the brink of collapse. Its armies were broken, its territories divided, and its enemies were watching closely. Many believed the Ottoman story had ended, but history had other plans. This is the story of chaos, civil war, survival, and the rise of Mehmed I, the Sultan who rebuilt an empire from its ashes. When Bayezid the Thunderbolt died in Timur's captivity in 1403, he left behind a power vacuum and multiple sons, each claiming the right to rule. There was no clear line of succession, no single authority, no unity. The Ottoman state, once a fearsome, expanding power, fractured into rival territories. Each piece was ruled by a different prince, a son of the fallen sultan. This chaotic period became known as the Ottoman Empire, a brutal civil war that would last for more than a decade. The empire was still alive, but it was barely breathing, torn apart from within. Bayezid's sons carved up what remained of his empire. In the European territories known as Rumelia, Süleyman Çelebi held power. In western Anatolia, Isa Çelebi established his rule. Musa Çelebi, another brother, operated in the Balkans, gathering his own forces. And then there was Mimdi Çelebi, the youngest, who controlled the region of Amasya in central Anatolia. Each brother claimed to be the rightful heir. Each gathered supporters and prepared for the inevitable war. Brother fought brother, not for grand ideology or religious purpose, but for the most basic prize of all, survival. The civil war had begun, and the fate of the Ottomans hung in the balance. As the Ottoman princes tore their empire apart, the powers of Europe watched with keen interest. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The Byzantine Empire, a longtime rival, played a dangerous game, supporting different Ottoman princes at different times to keep them fighting. Other Balkan states, like Serbia, constantly shifted their alliances, backing whichever brother seemed most likely to prolong the chaos. Their goal was simple: keep the Ottomans divided and weak. But Europe underestimated one crucial factor: Ottoman resilience. Even in the midst of a devastating civil war, the core institutions of the Ottoman state, its bureaucracy and military structures, remained partially intact. The state bent under the immense pressure, but it did not break. While his brothers scrambled for power and made flashy moves, Mehmed Çelebi played a different game. From his base in Amasya, he ruled quietly. He didn't rush into grand battles. Instead, he focused on building alliances with local Turkish leaders and consolidating his own territory. He learned from his father's fatal mistake. Where Bayezid the Thunderbolt had relied on speed and aggression, Mehmed chose patience and strategy. He understood that survival had to come before ambition. He first had to secure his own foundation before he could dream of rebuilding the entire empire. This quiet, calculated approach would prove to be his greatest strength. Mehmed's first major test came from his own brother, Isa Çelebi, who controlled neighboring territories in Anatolia. The conflict was swift but decisive. Mehmed's forces defeated Isa, who was killed in the aftermath, eliminating one of the four main rivals for the throne. With this victory, Mehmed gained control over a significant portion of western Anatolia, strengthening his position immensely. One threat was gone, but the war for the soul of the empire was far from over. His other two brothers remained, and they were far more powerful. Meanwhile, in Europe, Süleyman Çelebi ruled the Ottoman territories from the capital of Edirne. With support from the Byzantine emperor, he enjoyed a life of luxury and pleasure, often neglecting the duties of a ruler. This loose style of governance began to weaken his authority. His own brother, Musa Çelebi, who had once been his ally, saw an opportunity. Gathering support from those who were dissatisfied with Süleyman's decadent rule, Musa launched a rebellion. He successfully defeated Süleyman's forces, and Süleyman himself was killed while trying to flee. Musa took control of Rumelia, but his own style of rule would soon create a new set of problems. Musa's reign was one of fear and aggression. He immediately launched harsh attacks against the Byzantine Empire. His former A-list supporter, he ruled through intimidation, alienating the very nobles and military commanders who had helped him rise to power. While his ferocity frightened his enemies, it also terrified his allies. Discontent began to spread like wildfire through the Ottoman ranks in Europe. Soldiers and officials grew tired of his tyrannical methods. This widespread dissatisfaction created the perfect opening for the patient prince waiting in Anatolia. With his enemies in Europe turning against each other, Mehmed saw his moment. He crossed the strait from Anatolia into Europe with a clear and singular goal: to end the civil war and reunite the empire. He didn't come alone. He had formed alliances with Balkan rulers and, more importantly, with the disgruntled Ottoman commanders who were eager to desert Musa. In 1430, near modern-day Sofia in Bulgaria, Mehmed confronted his last remaining brother. The battle was decisive. Musa's army was defeated, and he was captured and executed. For the first time in over 10 years, the Ottoman Empire had a single, undisputed ruler. The interregnum was over. Mehmed Çelebi was officially crowned sultan. Mehmed I, he inherited an empire that was deeply scarred and damaged, but an empire nonetheless. His first priority was not conquest, but unity. He worked tirelessly to restore central authority. He rewarded the commanders and allies who had shown him loyalty, and he punished rebellion carefully, not with blind rage, but with calculated justice. Mehmed understood that his role was not to be another conqueror like his father, but to be a healer. He was the second founder of the Ottoman state. Over the next 8 years of his reign, Mehmed I focused on rebuilding what the long war had destroyed. The army was reorganized and disciplined. The state treasury, depleted by years of conflict, was stabilized. Provincial governance was restored, bringing order back to the lands. Critically, he avoided major new wars, focusing instead on securing peace and internal stability. He signed treaties with his European neighbors, including Byzantium, buying precious time for his empire to recover. Under Mehmed's patient and wise leadership, the Ottomans slowly but surely regained their strength. The empire that had been on the verge of death was alive again. The first's most profound achievements is one that history often overlooks. He didn't just rebuild an empire, he secured its future by preparing the next generation. Think about it. In an age where succession was almost always a bloody affair, Mem did something revolutionary. He ensured his son was not just educated, but thoroughly trained, and, crucially, accepted by the state apparatus long before his own death. This wasn't just good parenting. It was brilliant. There would be no sudden power vacuum, no brothers turning on each other for the throne, and no devastating civil war to tear the empire apart all over again. With this single, quiet act of foresight, Memdi altered the course of Ottoman history forever, preventing the cycle of self-destruction that had plagued so many dynasties. Growing up in this environment was Prince Murad. He didn't just hear tales of the empire's he watched it being rebuilt, brick by brick. His education wasn't confined to dusty scrolls. He learned diplomacy by observing the negotiations for peace treaties. He understood leadership by witnessing the military reforms firsthand. And perhaps most importantly, he learned the power of restraint from his father's steady example. Murad's upbringing wasn't one of pampered luxury. It was steeped in responsibility. He was a prince in waiting, not a prince in waiting rooms. Day by day, decision by decision, the future of the empire was being quietly forged in the character of its next sultan. As stability returned, something miraculous happened. After years of brutal division where people identified with rival warlords, they once again began to call themselves. This wasn't just a name. It was a renewed sense of shared identity and purpose. The tangible signs were everywhere. Markets, once deserted, buzzed with activity. Trade routes, long considered unsafe, were revived, bringing goods and gold back into the heartlands. Mosques and courts, the pillars of social and legal life, functioned normally again. The empire had regained something far more valuable than territory or treasuret, had regained its confidence. The belief in a shared future, which had been shattered by civil war, was now painstakingly restored. But not everyone saw this revival as a positive. The neighboring Byzantine Empire, ever the opportunist, made a final, fatal miscalculation. They saw Mem's focus on internal stability as a sign of weakness. Believing the Ottomans were a spent force, they began to meddle in Ottoman politics, supporting false claimants to the throne and trying to stir up trouble to regain their lost influence. Memdi's response was a masterclass. In controlled power, he reacted with a calm, almost unnerving patience. He tolerated Byzantium's provocations for the moment, prioritizing his own empire's healing. But he never forgot. The reckoning for this interference was not cancelled. It was merely postponed. Memdan understood that a lasting empire couldn't be held together by brute force alone. He placed an immense emphasis on building a robust legal structure. This wasn't just about writing laws. It was about ensuring they were applied. Judges were closely monitored to prevent bias and bribery. Corruption, a cancer in any government, was swiftly and publicly punished. Crucially, justice was meant to apply equally to everyone, from the highest-ranking soldier to the most humble civilian. This simple but radical idea strengthened loyalty far more than fear ever could. An empire ruled by law, he knew, would endure long after one ruled by terror had crumbled. Of course, wars and civil wars are incredibly expensive. They drain a state's treasury faster than anything else. Memdi tackled this problem with the same methodical approach he applied to everything. He stabilized the empire's revenue streams, making taxes predictable and fair rather than arbitrary and crippling. He actively protected trade routes, knowing that commerce was the lifeblood of the economy. And he brought military spending under control, ending the era of wasteful, vanity-driven campaigns. By the end of his reign, the Ottoman treasury was healthy again. The empire was financially solvent and ready for expansion. When the time was right, this new sense of control extended to the military itself. Memd fundamentally changed the army's philosophy. The era of reckless charges and fighting for the sake of glory was over. Under his command, every campaign had a clear, strategic purpose. Every battle was weighed, its costs and benefits carefully calculated. Unnecessary risks were avoided. This disciplined, pragmatic approach to warfare was a gift. It was this very philosophy that would later allow smaller, better prepared Ottoman armies to systematically defeat larger, more disorganized European forces. Preparation, not just passion, became the new source of Ottoman power. From the outside, Mehmed's reign might have looked deceptively quiet, almost uneventful, especially compared to the explosive conquests that came before and after. But this tranquility was a facade. Beneath the calm surface, the empire wasn't resting. It was sharpening its blade. Soldiers were engaged in constant training, honing their skills. Commanders were drawing up plans, studying maps, and analyzing potential enemies. Princes were being groomed for leadership. This period of silence was not a sign of weakness. It was a deliberate strategy. It was the deep, quiet breath an empire takes before it roars back to life. So how should history judge Mehmed I? He's often overlooked, squeezed between the dramatic collapse of the interregnum and the spectacular conquests of his successors like Mehmed the Conqueror. His reign features no grand, legendary sieges or massive territorial gains. Yet, to ignore him is to misunderstand Ottoman history completely. Without Mehmed I, the Ottoman Empire would likely have been a historical footnote, a promising power that imploded in 1403. He was the indispensable bridge between collapse and greatness. He was the restorer, the stabilizer, the quiet architect who made everything that followed possible. And his final victory was perhaps his greatest. When Mehmed I died, his son, Murad II, ascended to the throne. There was no rebellion. There was no chaos. There was no bloodshed among brothers. The transition was seamless. The empire stood united, strong, and ready for its next chapter. This peaceful transfer of power was the ultimate testament to his life's work. Mehmed did not conquer great cities, he conquered instability itself. History is a graveyard of empires that couldn't survive civil war. Think about it. The mighty Roman Empire split, fractured, and eventually collapsed. The Mongol Empire, once the largest in history, broke into pieces and faded away. The Abbasid Caliphate never recovered from its internal strife. After the disaster at the Battle of Ankura, the Ottoman Empire was supposed to join that list of fallen dynasties. They had lost vast territories. Their reputation was in tatters. The fear they once inspired in their enemies was gone. From Venice to Hungary, European powers believed the Ottoman threat was over for good. They saw a broken state, ripe for the picking. But then, something incredibly rare happened. The empire didn't just survive. It adapted. It learned. It grew stronger from its near-death experience. How? What saved them from the brink of total annihilation? There were three core reasons the Ottomans defied history. First, their institutions were surprisingly strong. Even with multiple brothers fighting for the throne and chaos reigning at the top, local governors continued to collect taxes. Judges continued to enforce the law. The machinery of the state kept turning, even when the head was missing. This provided a baseline of stability that most fractured empires lacked. Second, the military structure remained loyal and centralized. The Janissaries, the elite heart of the Ottoman army, didn't splinter into a dozen different factions. They remained a disciplined, unified force loyal to the central idea of the empire, waiting for a single, legitimate ruler to emerge. This prevented the complete military collapse that usually accompanies civil war. And third, the strategic leadership of Mehmed I. He was the ultimate victor of the civil war, but he didn't win just by being the best general. He won by being the smartest leader. Without these three pillar-strong institutions, a loyal military and wise leadership Ottoman history would have ended right there in the early 15th century. Mehmed I had a profound understanding of human psychology. His brothers had tried to rule through fear, through brute force. Mehmed chose a different path. He chose to rule by restoring dignity and pride. He understood that you can't build a lasting empire on a foundation of terror. So what did he do? He publicly honored the veterans who had fought through the years of chaos. He provided pensions and support for the families of fallen soldiers. He didn't purge local leaders who had sided with his rivals. Instead, he brought them back into the fold, respecting their positions. Slowly but surely, people started to feel proud to be Ottoman again. The empire wasn't just a machine of conquest, it was a community, a civilization worth defending. And that sense of shared identity, that pride, is a force far more powerful and enduring than any punishment or threat. It's the glue that holds a nation together when everything else is falling apart. The years of civil war had ravaged the heartland of the empire. Anatolia. Villages were burned to the ground. Crucial trade routes, the arteries of the economy, were cut off. Terrified farmers had abandoned their lands, leading to widespread famine and poverty. The empire was bleeding from 1,000 cuts. Mehmed knew that a strong army was useless if the people were starving. So, he launched a massive reconstruction program. His first priority wasn't building new forts. It was rebuilding lives. He sent out engineers to repair roads and bridges. He offered tax breaks and protection to merchants to reopen the markets. He gave seeds and tools to farmers to encourage them to return to their fields. The empire didn't just rebuild its armies. It was rebuilding the very fabric of society. Life was returning to Anatolia, and with it, the strength of the empire. Meanwhile, in Europe, the Christian kingdoms completely misread the situation. They looked at Mehmed I and saw weakness. He wasn't launching grand invasions. He was signing peace treaties. He was using diplomacy instead of the sword. They mistook his patience for fear, his focus on rebuilding for a lack of ambition. They whispered to each other that the Ottoman lion had lost its teeth. What they failed to see was that Mehmed wasn't being weak. He was being strategic. He was healing the empire's wounds, consolidating his power, and preparing it for something far greater than they could imagine. He was playing the long game. History would soon prove just how wrong their assessment was. This period under Mehmed I marked a fundamental shift in the Ottoman mindset. Before the civil war, the empire's rulers were focused primarily on rapid conquest and expansion. It was all about speed, about taking new territory as quickly as possible. But the civil war taught them a brutal lesson. Conquest without consolidation is fragile. After Mehmed, the new focus was on long-term empire building. The administration was professionalized. The bureaucracy was expanded and made more efficient. They invested in education and infrastructure. This wasn't as glorious as winning a great battle, but it was far more important. This shift is what allowed the empire to not just conquer vast, diverse territories in the future, but to rule them effectively for centuries. When we think of great Ottoman sultans, we often remember Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople. But very few remember Mehmed I, the restorer. His legacy is hidden, overshadowed by the grand achievements of his successors. But let's be clear, without Mehmed I, there would have been no Mehmed II. Without the restorer, there would be no strong and stable empire for his son, Murad II, to inherit. There would be no powerful, disciplined army ready to march on the greatest city in the world. There would be no siege of Constantinople. Mehmed I didn't build the glorious tower that everyone remembers, but he laid the unbreakable foundation upon which it stood. After Mehmed I's death, the Ottoman Empire entered a rare and precious period of calm. The borders were secure. Internal rebellions were minimal. The treasury was full, and the army was strong, rested, and ready. But this calm was deceptive. It was the quiet before a storm. A new generation of Ottomans had grown up hearing stories not of defeat and civil war, but of restoration and strength. They were hungry, they were ambitious, and they were looking outwards towards new horizons and new conquests. The storm was coming. When Murad II ascended to the throne, he didn't inherit the chaos and division his father had. He inherited a well-oiled machine. He inherited a professionally trained army with high morale. He inherited a stable treasury, capable of funding long and ambitious campaigns. He inherited a loyal bureaucracy that could efficiently manage the empire. And most importantly, he inherited a united population, proud of their identity and loyal to the Sultan. This combination gave him a level of power that none of his rivals, in Europe or in Asia, could match, and Europe would soon feel the full force of this renewed Ottoman power. History loves to celebrate the conquerors, the charismatic generals who win dramatic victories. We remember the names of those who built empires. But we often forget the builders, the quiet heroes who saved them. Mehmed I never captured a legendary city like Constantinople. He never led a massive invasion of Europe. His victories weren't fought on the battlefield. They were won in the halls of government, in the fields of Anatolia, and in the hearts of his people. He saved a civilization from itself. He repaired what war had destroyed. He united what division had shattered. His victory was invisible, but it was permanent. So, at their absolute weakest moment, when the world expected them to collapse, the Ottomans did not surrender. They didn't break. They adapted. They healed. Y prepared. From the ashes of a devastating defeat rose a stronger, smarter, and more resilient empire. And now, the Ottomans are ready to march again. Thank you for watching. If you found this story of resilience and recovery as fascinating as we did, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history. We'll see you in the next episode.